Before diving into this incredible story, consider subscribing to the channel and hitting the bell. Every story here has something to say, and you won't want to miss a single one. Marcus Johnson had known the weight of stairs since he was a child. A black man from a modest neighborhood, he had learned to stand tall, smile despite prejudice, and maintain dignity in the face of the silent judgments of others. At 28, he was working as a server at a small downtown cafe, a cozy place where regulars came for their daily coffee and a little comfort. That morning, the sun filtered through the cafe's large windows, illuminating the polished wooden tables and shelves lined with fresh pastries. Marcus adjusted his apron, ready to face a day like any other. But he didn't yet know that this day would be different. A woman in a wheelchair entered the cafe. Her face expressed an unusual gentleness, but her eyes betrayed a deep determination. Marcus rushed to help her, guiding her to a table by the window. He poured her a hot coffee, carefully placed it in front of her. She thanked him with a simple smile, then, with a surprising gesture, handed him a newspaper clipping. Marcus blinked, hesitating. It wasn't a bill or a tip. It was a printed piece of paper, and he felt, without knowing why, that this simple gesture would change his day, and his entire life. As he took the clipping, the woman placed her hand on his and said in a calm but firm voice, "Read this. I think you need to see what others have experienced, and what you can change." Marcus felt a shiver run down his spine. He didn't yet know that behind that piece of paper lay a lesson in courage, dignity, and justice, capable of transforming not only his life, but that of his entire community. Marcus stared at the newspaper clipping, his heart beating a little faster. The printed letters seemed to jump before his eyes, but he took a deep breath and began to read. The article recounted a scandal about a local cafe owner who had humiliated a black employee in front of his colleagues and customers, simply because of his skin color. The waiter felt a mixture of anger and sadness wash over him. He remembered those times when some customers looked at him suspiciously, when the owner of his cafe made under his breath remarks he couldn't ignore. The parallel with his own life was disturbing. The woman in the wheelchair, Eleanor Whitman, watched him intently, a slight smile on her lips. She finally broke the silence. "You see, Marcus, some injustices are repeated because no one dares to speak out. But you can do something." Marcus looked up, surprised by the woman's calm but determined tone. "Me?" he asked, his voice trembling slightly. "I'm just a waiter. I have no power." Eleanor shook her head gently. "Power isn't always in titles or money. True power, Marcus, is maintaining dignity, speaking up when needed, and supporting those who can't afford it." For the first time in a long time, Marcus felt a spark of hope. He understood that his daily patience, his respect for others, and his quiet courage already had meaning. This simple newspaper clipping, this unexpected gesture, had just shown him that he could transform his indignation into action. He carefully folded the piece of paper and placed it in front of Eleanor. "All right. I'll try. I'll listen and understand." She smiled at him approvingly. "That's all I ask for now. The rest will come." This moment marked the beginning of an unexpected journey for Marcus. It wasn't just a lesson in past injustices, it was the opening of a door to a future where he could make a real difference in the lives of others. After a few moments of silence, Eleanor spoke again, her voice soft but firm. "Marcus, I didn't choose you at random." The waiter looked at her, intrigued. "How so?" he asked, trying to hide his nervousness. Eleanor smiled slightly and pushed down on the armrests of her chair to move closer. "I've long observed those who maintain their dignity, even when the world seems to want to rip it away. You are one of those rare few." Marcus felt himself blush, embarrassed by the unexpected compliment. I'm just doing my job." "Just your job?" Eleanor retorted with a light laugh. "No, Marcus. What you do is much more than that. You treat every customer with respect, you remain calm in the face of injustice, and you help others without expecting anything in return. It's that kind of quiet courage that makes a difference." She handed him the newspaper clipping again. This cafe where you work has an owner who, despite his appearance, has a, let's say, complicated past. He humiliated black employees. But no one dared to stand up to him. I want to see if you, Marcus, will dare. The waiter felt a surge of anger rise within him, but he controlled himself. Why me? Why not go to someone else, someone with more power or experience? Eleanor placed her hand on his, with a gravity that made Marcus shiver. Because real change doesn't always come from the powerful. It comes from those who live injustice every day and refuse to accept it. You have that strength. And together, we can show this city that dignity and justice aren't privileges, but rights. Marcus felt an immense responsibility weigh on his shoulders, but instead of backing away, he took a deep breath. All right, tell me what I need to do. Eleanor's face lit up. For now, listen, observe, and learn. The next steps will come. But know this, every action, no matter how small, can provoke a big reaction. It was at that precise moment that Marcus realized his life was about to change. The simple newspaper clipping had opened the door to a world he had never imagined, a world where his courage, patience, and dignity could become powerful weapons against injustice. After their discussion, Marcus returned to his shift, but his thoughts never left Eleanor and the newspaper clipping. Every smile he offered customers, every cup of coffee he placed on a table, now seemed charged with a deeper meaning. He began to think back on all the silent humiliations he had suffered, that contemptuous look from a customer, that half-whispered comment from the owner, that feeling of being invisible despite his hard work. When he waited on a table by the window, he noticed how much of an impact his daily patience was having. One grumpy customer smiled at him, another exchanged a kind word. Marcus felt a spark, maybe what he did every day wasn't just his job. Later, as he was finishing his shift, Eleanor called out to him gently. Marcus, come here for a moment. He joined her, sitting down opposite her. She took out a small notebook and handed it to Marcus. I've kept notes on incidents similar to the ones you've experienced here and elsewhere in town. Employees humiliated, customers scorned, stories that were never told, until now. Marcus flipped through the notebook, reading anecdotes that resonated strangely with his own life. Tales of black waiters, cooks, and employees being treated condescendingly or ignored despite their hard work. Each of these incidents seemed familiar, too familiar. I want you to see this not as a burden, but as a connection, Eleanor explained. Every story is proof that dignity and courage are necessary. And every person who dares to speak out becomes a link in that chain. Marcus felt a mixture of emotion and determination. You mean I should be that link? He asked, his voice shaky but resolute. Eleanor nodded. Exactly. You've already shown that you can remain dignified in the face of adversity. Now it's time to use that strength to help others, to make their voices heard. This moment created a silent bond between Marcus and Eleanor, a bond based on mutual understanding, respect, and the belief that everyone can change the reality around them. Marcus understood then that his role went far beyond serving coffee. He was becoming an agent of change, a silent advocate for justice, and Eleanor would be his guide on this journey. In the following days, Marcus continued to serve at the cafe, but every gesture, every smile, was now tinged with a new awareness. He carefully observed the behavior of the owner, Mr. Carlton, a man in his 50s, always outwardly polite, but whose half-hearted words betrayed a constant arrogance toward the black employees. One afternoon, while he was waiting on a table, Mr. Carlton called him over to the counter. Marcus, he said, his voice neutral, I heard you spoke with this Mrs. Whitman. Marcus straightened, controlling the rising nervousness. Yes, sir. Mr. Carlton raised an eyebrow. You understand that you are not to interfere in outside affairs. Here, we follow the rules, and you must remain focused on your duty. Marcus felt his blood boil, but he took a deep breath. I understand, sir. But I also believe that remaining passive in the face of injustice is not an option. I do my job with respect and dignity, and I refuse to let the past or fear dictate my actions. A heavy silence fell. Mr. Carlton, surprised by the firmness in Marcus's voice, looked away. For the first time, he felt his authority was no longer unchallenged. Marcus had found a strength he could no longer ignore. Later, during his break, Marcus recounted the incident to Eleanor over the phone. "He tried to intimidate me, but I think it made a difference," he said, a mixture of pride and apprehension in his voice. Eleanor smiles, even from a distance. "Exactly. Every confrontation is an opportunity. You show that you refuse to accept injustice, and you inspire others to do the same. But remember, courage doesn't mean acting alone. We will support you and help you turn this confrontation into lasting change." That day marked a turning point for Marcus. The fear he had felt for years in the face of injustice began to dissolve. He understood that his dignity, patience, and courage were more powerful than any threat or arrogance. And for the first time, he felt ready to take action, for himself and for all those who, like him, had been silenced. The next morning, Marcus met Eleanor at the cafe. She had arrived earlier, her wheelchair gliding smoothly across the polished floor. In her hands, she held a thick, neatly organized folder. "Marcus," she began, "I have a proposition for you." The waiter looked at her intently, a mixture of concern and curiosity in his eyes. "What?" he began, but Eleanor cut him off gently. "I want us to work together to expose the injustices facing Black employees in the city's cafes and restaurants. I know the people, the contacts, and I can help you document the cases and make sure our voices are heard." Marcus felt his heart race. Part of him wanted to say yes immediately, but another part was cautious. "This is huge," he murmured. "I don't know if I'm ready for this." Eleanor placed her hand on the file. "You're ready, Marcus. You've already shown your courage by remaining dignified in the face of daily humiliations. What I propose is that you turn that courage into something concrete. We'll gather testimonies, create reports, and organize events to raise awareness among the public and the media." Marcus took a deep breath. The thought of exposing himself, of facing Mr. Carlton or other influential people, terrified him. But he also felt a new strength, a conviction he had never felt before. "Okay," he said finally, his voice firm. "I'll do it. But where do we start?" Eleanor smiled, a sparkle of pride in her eyes. "For now, listen, observe, and write down everything you see. The injustices, the humiliations, the little things no one notices. Then we'll decide how best to share them with the city." It was the beginning of an unexpected collaboration. Marcus felt that a new chapter in his life had opened. He was no longer just a waiter, he was becoming an agent of change, a witness and a defender of justice. And every gesture, every smile, and every word he spoke would now carry a new weight, that of dignity, courage, and hope. In the following days, Marcus threw himself fully into the mission Eleanor had entrusted him with. He used every break, every free moment at the cafe, to carefully observe what was happening around him. He noted the condescending looks, the barely veiled remarks, and the small, humiliating gestures the employees were subjected to. He began talking quietly with his colleagues. Some were hesitant at first, fearing reprisals, but the trust Marcus inspired gave them the courage to share their experiences. Their stories were sometimes heartbreaking: a cook fired for a trivial reason, a waitress ignored by the owner, an employee ridiculed in front of customers. It all painted a devastating picture of everyday injustice. Eleanor, for her part, helped him organize this information. "Every story matters, Marcus. Every voice is important. The more testimonies we have, the more we'll be able to show the reality of what Black employees are experiencing here." Marcus began to feel a mixture of anger and pride. Anger at all these injustices, but pride in being able to document and share them. For the first time, he understood that his role went far beyond that of a waiter. He was becoming a voice for those no one was listening to. One afternoon, while reviewing his notes, Marcus realized that what he was doing was already having an impact on his colleagues. They felt supported, heard, and less alone in the face of humiliation. Some smiled more at work, others dared to express their opinions in meetings. Marcus understood that change began with small gestures, but that they could create a chain reaction. Eleanor encouraged her to consider taking public action first. Now is not the time to directly confront Mr. Carlton or to publicize the matter. But soon, we will show this city that dignity and courage can triumph over injustice. Marcus nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility on his shoulders. But this time, he didn't feel fear, he felt determination. Every note, every testimony, every conversation with his colleagues brought him closer to a greater goal. And for the first time in his life, he felt able to transform anger and frustration into something positive, for himself and for all those who had no voice. After several weeks of preparation, Marcus and Eleanor decided it was time to take an important step: organize a first public meeting to raise awareness in the community about the injustices experienced by Black employees in the city's cafes and restaurants. They reserved a small community room, simply but warmly decorated. The walls were lined with paintings and inspirational quotes about justice and respect. A table in the center was covered with documents, photos, and anonymous testimonies, ready to be shared. When the day came, locals began to arrive, curious to see what Marcus and Eleanor had prepared. Some were colleagues from the cafe, others friends, neighbors, or simply citizens eager to know more. Marcus felt his heart beat faster as he spoke to the crowd. Nervousness showed on his face, but he took a deep breath and remembered Eleanor's advice: stay sincere, speak from the heart, and let your dignity guide your words. "Hello everyone," he began, his voice slightly shaky but clear. "My name is Marcus Johnson, and I work as a waiter at a downtown coffee shop. In the past few weeks, I've discovered, thanks to Eleanor Whitman, that many of us experience daily humiliation simply because of the color of our skin." He showed the documents and testimonies collected. "These stories are not just mine. They belong to colleagues, friends, neighbors, and many other people who do not dare to speak out. Today, we want these voices to be heard. We want our dignity to be recognized." The room was silent for a moment, then a hand timidly rose. It was a waitress from the cafe, sharing her experience of humiliation in front of customers and veiled threats from the owner. Gradually, other people began to speak, some with trembling voices, others with newfound determination. Marcus looked at Eleanor, who gave him an encouraging nod. He realized that this moment was much more than just a meeting, it was a catalyst for the community. Each of the testimonies reinforced the importance of speaking out, taking action, and supporting others. At the end of the meeting, the room echoed with applause and murmurs of encouragement. Marcus felt a wave of pride and responsibility wash over him. This was only the beginning, but he knew that, step by step, they could make a real difference. Eleanor placed her hand on Marcus's shoulder. "See, Marcus? Change starts with one voice, then two, then a whole community." For the first time, Marcus fully understood that his courage, dignity, and commitment could inspire far more than he could ever have imagined. A few days after the first public meeting, Marcus sensed an unusual tension in the cafe. Mr. Carlton, the owner, was watching him coldly and calculatingly from the counter. His eyes scrutinized every gesture, every smile, as if searching for a flaw. Later that day, he called Marcus into his office, the door closed behind them. "Marcus," he began, his voice cold, "I heard you've been attending meetings with this Mrs. Whitman." Marcus raised his head, his gaze firm. "Yes, sir. We are working to document and expose the injustices some employees suffer." Mr. Carlton raised an eyebrow, a sneer playing on his lips. "Do you really think you can change anything? You're just a waiter." Marcus took a deep breath, feeling all his anger rising but controlling it. "I believe every voice matters, sir. And I believe that remaining silent in the face of injustice is more dangerous than speaking out." The owner clenched his fists, furious to see Marcus standing up straight and speaking with such conviction. He then tried to threaten Marcus, "If you continue, you'll regret challenging my authority." But Marcus, with his newfound confidence and the support of the community, did not give in. "I am not afraid to stand up for what is right. I know now that my courage and dignity are worth more than your fear or arrogance." A few hours later, some of the cafe's employees came to see Marcus privately. They all expressed their support and admiration for his courage. "We knew someone had to speak out," one of them whispered. "Thank you for taking that risk for all of us." News of the confrontation spread quickly through the town, and the local media began to pick up on the story. Mr. Carlton, though powerful in his small cafe, realized that his attempt at intimidation had failed. The truth and community solidarity were now stronger than his threats. Eleanor, upon learning of the situation, congratulated Marcus. "You see? Your dignity and courage are not just for you. They inspire others and make those who want to maintain injustice tremble." For Marcus, this was a defining moment. He realized that remaining passive was no longer an option. He had found his voice, and nothing and no one could stop him from using it to stand up for what was right. A few weeks after the confrontation with Mr. Carlton, Marcus's story began to spread far beyond the walls of the cafe. Local media picked up on his initiative, recounting how a simple waiter had dared to denounce the injustices suffered by black employees in the city's cafes and restaurants. The response was immediate. Some of the cafe's customers began to support Marcus, praising his courage and dignity. Other businesses in the city reached out to him and Eleanor to share their own experiences and ask for advice on how to create a fairer environment for their employees. Marcus was stunned by the outpouring of support. The testimonies he had collected and the meetings he had organized were beginning to bear fruit. Employees felt less alone, and the community was beginning to understand that silence in the face of injustice was no longer an option. One evening, as he was leaving the cafe, Marcus received a call from Eleanor. "Marcus, come see this." He went to the community center, where a small ceremony had been held to honor citizens fighting for social justice. To his surprise, he discovered that several of his colleagues had been invited to speak, and that his name was mentioned as an example of courage and leadership. "You showed that even an ordinary person can bring about extraordinary change," said one of the organizers. "Your voice inspired an entire community." Marcus felt an intense emotion rise within him. He thought of all the humiliations he had suffered, the fear he had felt in front of Mr. Carlton, and the loneliness of the employees who dared not speak out. But now he saw that their collective courage was beginning to transform the city. Eleanor, still at his side, whispered in his ear. "You see, Marcus? It all started with a simple newspaper clipping and your choice not to remain silent. Every action, no matter how small, can have a huge impact." Marcus smiled, his heart light but determined. He knew there was still a long way to go, but for the first time, he saw that justice and dignity could triumph, and that his voice, combined with those of others, had the power to change reality. The city was beginning to listen, and Marcus felt ready to continue the fight, determined to inspire even more positive change around him. A few months after starting his initiative, Marcus looked out the window at the cafe. The place had changed, not only in its atmosphere, but also in the minds of those who worked there. The employees, previously reserved and sometimes fearful, were now openly discussing their ideas and experiences. Mutual respect now reigned in every corner, and even some customers who had previously ignored or judged Marcus seemed to regard him with newfound respect. Eleanor walked in, folder in hand and a warm smile on her face. "Marcus, we've been in the media again today. Several cafes in the city now want to adopt our model and ensure their employees are treated with respect." Marcus felt an overwhelming surge of emotion. What had begun as a simple act of courage, inspired by a newspaper clipping and a piece of kind advice, had grown into a grassroots movement. I never imagined it would go this far," he whispered. Eleanor placed her hand on his. "See? Every action counts. Every word, every smile, every gesture of dignity can create a snowball effect. And you were the catalyst." Marcus thought back to all the humiliations he had endured, the moments of doubt and fear. He understood that each of these experiences had prepared him for this moment. He was no longer simply a waiter, he had become a silent leader, an example of courage and resilience for his community. A few hours later, as he closed the cafe for the day, several employees and customers came up to thank him. "Thank you for speaking up for us," a young waitress said emotionally. "Thank you for showing us that our dignity matters." Marcus smiled, his heart filled with pride and serenity. For the first time, he felt that his role in the world had a profound meaning. He had transformed anger and injustice into a constructive force, and his community was beginning to reap the benefits. That evening, as he left the cafe, Marcus looked up at the starry sky and thought of Eleanor, the newspaper clipping, and all those who had believed in justice and dignity. He knew the road was still long, but now he had faith. Every day could be a step toward a more just world, and he, Marcus Johnson, would continue to walk this path with courage, determination, and humanity. The city had changed, but more importantly, Marcus had changed. And from that moment on, he knew that no injustice would be too great to be faced with dignity and courage.